welcome. This particular event is something very, very special, and I'd like to just have a few remarks from Mr. Linigay, which always has words of wisdom.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome Mr. Darrell Freund. He is going to conduct the program for these coming 3 days, including today. And this is a very important program for all of us. Now, we have been learning the subject matter all these days, and we will continue to do so even after this. But now, as we mentioned at the very beginning, the purpose of this exercise is to make you the trainers. It is not only you are gathering knowledge here, but you are going to impart the knowledge to all your colleagues in your workplaces. Otherwise, I don't think in public service we can take this message round the entire public service unless we have a core group to take it on our behalf to their colleagues, their ministries and workplaces. So therefore, now Mr. Darrell Freund will be telling you how to do it. And he is an expert in this, and I think Mr. Thomas Burola mentioned to me that he has a lot of experience in right around the world, in various countries, as well as in his job itself, giving the techniques of training. So now these 3 days we will be, so it may be a little bit, I think, difficult for you, sometimes boring, because now all what we have been doing all these days, we all know about procurement. We are involved in procurement, and every day we hear about it, either the good side of it or bad side of it. So there was no problem, and it was quite interesting. But here I think you have to bear with the resource person as well as the organizers and try to extract as much as possible on the techniques of training. So I hope that this will be, because we have among us the expert, and of course even Mr. Thomas can chip in because he is also knowledgeable in training, so that we will, I think, try to follow as closely as possible these techniques, which will be useful to you all as well as useful to us in the future programs. In fact, last time Mr. Burola asked you all to give certain your ideas about how to take this forward. And then, of course, I suggested that we will have, after this, training programs in main ministries, making use of you as the resource persons, while other resource persons are going to assist you, like the internship. So I think we can go beyond that. Once we have this and once we complete our subject matter training, we have some more things to do. So I hope this will be a very useful program, and you all will learn the techniques. We also have some techniques, of course. We have been training some people on various other things. But you all will learn the real proper techniques of training and will be useful to all of us. And I wish all the best, and let us have a fruitful program these 3 days. Thank you.
So Darrell, with that, all right, I'd like to turn over and Mr. Darrell will give you his background and so forth and so on. So hope you enjoy it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. As Tom noted, I've already spent 2 days, well, the first 2 days of this week, delivering this training to some of your colleagues in the Ministry of Finance. And I've delivered this sort of training, as this last bullet point shows. I've delivered TOTs in in Africa, in Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, as well as Central Asia. I'm also a PFM expert, a public financial management expert, but more on the budget formulation side. I know you folks are on the execution side as far as budget execution is concerned with procurement. But there is a nexus, right, with budget planning and budget execution. On the budget planning side, the planners need to plan on how they're going to be procuring any goods and services over the course of any fiscal year. So I have worked with procurement experts in the past. I've worked with FMIS experts, chart of account experts, accountants, economists. So I've done a lot of technical training. I enjoy the TOT training because, as Tom said, it's not technical subject matter. We're not going to be discussing contracts. We're not going to be discussing negotiation techniques, procurement planning, disposal of assets. I mean, you name it. These are all technical matters or topics that I'm sure you've already covered in trainings that Tom has offered and other people have offered and will continue to get coverage in over the course of your careers. Today and tomorrow and for Friday morning, we're going to be spending some time talking about what does it mean to be a trainer? How do you prepare training? How do you prepare for training? How do you select trainees? How do you conduct a training needs assessment in order to figure out what capacity gaps people have that can then be addressed in the training programs that you prepare? We'll talk about how to prepare training curriculum and guidelines and materials. We'll talk about public speaking techniques. Also, I think we're going to have some fun because we're also going to be talking about how to overcome public speaking nervousness. I'm sure that there are a lot of folks out there who would rather sit in a dentist's chair and get a root canal than give a public speaking address or speak in front of a large group of audience. Some of you are smiling, which is a good sign. As a trainer, you like to see that sort of thing, especially in the beginning. You want to break the ice with people, right? Even if you're doing very technical training, you want to break the ice with people. You want to start recognizing faces. You want to start having eye contact. For example, later on this morning, I'm going to start asking questions of people randomly. Some people are going to be very uncomfortable with that and won't want to ask a question. As a matter of fact, on Monday, when I did that to somebody, she got up and ran out of the room. First time in my 23-year experience of doing this sort of training or any sort of training that I picked on somebody to answer a harmless, simple question and have that person so terrified they got up and ran out. And then they did it again later on in the morning. So I took that person off to the side during a break and I found out what was wrong. She's basically terrified of public speaking. But during yesterday's exercise where we had people break up into groups, which you will also do tomorrow and Friday, to give presentations, she was a rock star. Through the coaching and the mentoring that I tried to give her during this short presentation, she was able to give a 1-minute presentation without getting up and running out of the room. So I'm glad that at least that was accomplished. Now, as Tom mentioned, I am a full-time staff for the consulting company called Nathan Associates, which is based in Washington, D.C. I don't know how many of you have heard of the company. I'm going to give it a quick plug. It's the oldest economic and governance consulting firm in America. It was established in 1946 by a man named Robert Nathan, who was an economist and advisor, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the war. He helped, some of you might have heard this term before, he helped establish what later became known as the military-industrial complex, which is the fancy term for American manufacturing production that geared up before and during World War II to help win the war against fascist Germany and Japan. All the guns that were made, all the boats that were made, all the boots that were made, all the tanks that were constructed, the planes, the bullets. All these things were done in an effort to win World War II. But after World War II, Robert Nathan realized or recognized that the world was damaged physically. The war wreaked havoc and destruction throughout Europe, Asia, Africa. So he established this consulting firm to help rebuild the world. And his initial efforts focused on rebuilding countries like South Korea and Burma. So I'm proud to be a part of Nathan Associates. I just had my 2-year anniversary there. Before joining Nathan's, I worked for various companies around the world, delivering PFM trainings as well as TOT. And like I said in my opening comments, I enjoy TOT because we're going to have some fun. You're going to see. There'll be smiles, and there'll be people having a good time. Every good trainer needs to set some ground rules. So for this training, here are some of the ground rules. You can ask a question whenever you want. This is a rather informal training. And if you feel like you have a question or a concern or a comment, or you want to share an anecdote, a story, because as you're going to see later on, sharing a story or a personal anecdote to relate to a training is a good way for a trainer to also break the ice with the people that he or she is trying to train. The training ground rules are important to lay out in the beginning so that people understand what I expect or what the trainer expects from the trainees, and so the trainees also know what's acceptable and not acceptable. If you raise your hand and ask a question, there's no silly question. Okay, you can ask whatever you like. Please don't use your phone. If I catch you using your phone, I'll do this to it. Did you see what I just did there? Okay, I just used a prop. I just used a prop as a trainer to get some gasps and ohs. Wow, he's serious. This is an old phone. I don't use it anymore. Actually, it was given to me by one of my Sri Lankan colleagues the other day. But do you see what I did there? I got your attention, right? It was funny, wasn't it? Some of you were surprised and shocked. I used a prop as a trainer to keep you folks interested and amused and wanting more. In all seriousness, if you need to use your phone, please use it outside. I won't throw it in the water, unless you repeatedly use it here, and then I will take it at, no, I'm kidding. Anyway, but you see the effectiveness of what I just did. It was fun. You got gasps. It caught people's attention. I'll teach you other ways and other ways to use props throughout the training to also keep people captivated and interested. So I'd like to talk about a couple of bullet points here, or introduce these bullet points. One of the things also as a trainer that you have to keep in mind is you don't want to just read slides. Anybody can do that. You guys can do that. If I'm just going to sit down here and read slides, then we might as well just send you this stuff in an email, and you can sit at your desks in your office and read it yourselves. So you don't want to just repeat what you've written in the slide. Rather, you want what's in the slide to guide what you're going to say, and you want to periodically refer back to the slides, while also adding extra commentary, extra ideas and thoughts, and again, some anecdotes. So what we're going to discuss today, or at least for this session up until tea time, is what is training and why it's important, training categories. There are about 4 of them that I want to discuss. I'm sure you've all heard of them before. What is a TOT? How to select trainees and prepare in training programs and topics. How to prepare a training venue. This is a really important one. It's something that's taken for granted by a lot of people. I mean, I've been in a lot of countries around the world and have delivered trainings, and I usually try to visit the training venue the night before the training to make sure that the tables are aligned the way I want them, there are the number of seats that I want around the table, that there are pens and papers available, that the lighting is acceptable. I once delivered a training in Uganda, and I arrived at the training facility the night before the training, and they had a huge storm there, and all the windows were blown out. So I had to talk to the hotel about how we were going to fix this situation before the training was going to commence the next day. How am I going to train 50 people or 20 people from the Ugandan Ministry of Health on the basics of program-based budgeting if the windows are blown out and the air conditioning doesn't work and there's debris all over the training room? So you want to make sure that your training facility is ready to go for the training. So this is really a bullet point that people need to take seriously, and it can doom you. It can doom you. I'll give you another anecdote about how preparing a training venue can doom you. I've delivered trainings in hotels where the hotel never bothered to tell me that right above, in the floor above me or 3 floors above me, they're in the process of engaging in a $1 million or $100,000 or $10,000 renovation. and all you hear all day during the training is hammers against the wall and zzz, drills 3 stories ahead of you, and you can't deliver a training in those sorts of circumstances. So these are also the kinds of things that as a trainer you need to be aware of in order to not jeopardize your training. I imagine most of you are here, oh, not most of you, all of you are here today to attend this training because you're going to be delivering training here in Sri Lanka. That could include out in the districts. Now, this is my first trip to Sri Lanka. I haven't been outside Colombo. But I've been working in over 20 countries, and in many of those countries, I've gone out to the districts, the towns, the villages. Conditions can be Spartan there. In some cases, electricity is spotty. Internet might not be possible. You might have a situation where the only reasonable or decent conference room or training room is in a government office rather than a hotel. So if you've been asked to attend this training because you're going to be delivering training not only here in Colombo at ministries, but also out in the districts, you're going to need to keep this in mind about preparing training venues, making sure you identify the proper training venue, making sure that it has the bare minimums or essentials in order for you to deliver a training where people are comfortable, where they're not sweating, where there aren't mosquitoes, where the lighting is adequate. So these are the kinds of things you need to keep in mind when preparing a training venue. We're also going to talk about how to keep trainees focused on your training presentation. Some of you, it hasn't happened yet, but some of you at some point this morning will do something like this. That's fine. I won't be insulted. I do it sometimes also. But when you start seeing, as a trainer, when you start seeing too many people doing that, you need to start asking yourself quickly some really important internal questions. Why is that person nodding off? Or why is that person actually not nodding off, but in a deep sleep, maybe even snoring, which has happened to me. So you want to figure out some techniques or ideas on how to keep your trainees focused on your presentation. Throwing a phone into the water is good, but it only works 1, maybe 2 times. How to deal with unforeseen challenges that can jeopardize your training, like the construction going on above. I once delivered a training in Afghanistan, excuse me, at the Ministry of Finance, where the training room was right on the main road, and we constantly had military convoys going back and forth, American tanks, Afghanistan Army vehicles. The training room vibrated. It was horrible. I made the mistake of not preparing the training venue or going the night before to make sure the training venue was acceptable. I didn't know as I was new to Afghanistan. I learned the hard way, and I never again had a training in that training room. So this is the lessons learned, right? As we do throughout all things in life. We'll be talking about evaluating your training. Oh, sounds like a candidate for the water. Whose phone is that? No, I'm kidding. You don't have to run away. I won't throw your phone in the water. Evaluating your training, this is important. It's important for a couple of reasons. It's usually important to the people who are paying the bills, bilaterals and multilaterals, World Bank, ADB, DFID, the Japanese. I worked for AUSAID and DFAT. Now AUSAID is DFAT. The ASEAN Secretariat. Everybody wants their trainings evaluated. So that's one reason why it's important. Another reason why you're evaluating your training is important because as a trainer, you want to know how you can improve. And very often in the training evaluation forms, I mean, you folks have filled dozens of these out. Depending on every training you attend, you fill out evaluation forms. They're important to the trainer because if you're a good trainer and you do it often, you want feedback so you know how perhaps you can improve your performance in the future. It's very important. Evaluation is very important. We all get evaluated even in our personal lives, right? My wife is constantly complaining about me about a lot of things, but it's important to get the feedback so that we can make corrections and improve ourselves both professionally and personally. And I think this also ties into lessons learned. as far as training fundamentals are concerned. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, like anything else in life. So I want to start asking questions. How many of you have never delivered a training before, of any kind? You've never delivered any training, okay? How long have you been working for the Sri Lankan government? 3 years, so you're relatively new. Anybody here, you've never delivered any training. How long have you been working for the government? 2 years. 2, so you're also sort of a rookie, new. Before you joined the government, where were you? In university? In the private sector. Okay. For those of you who've been working for the government for more than 10 years, have you delivered trainings before? Those of you who've been working for more than 10 years. You have, okay. What kinds of trainings have you delivered?
I have conducted procurement training in very recently in the education ministry.
In the which ministry?
Education ministry.
Okay.
Earlier in divisional secretariats and in my ministry also.
Okay. Did you deliver that training alone, or were you a part of a team?
No. One day I conducted training for one day. For some selected topics, and another participant to this program conducted the other topics.
Okay. So you prepared your training slides.
Yes.
Did you, at any point before the training, try to find out the capacity gaps of the people that you were training? Or did you already have a broad idea?
Yeah, so, we prepared the training slides, but every time when we describe these things, we gave the participants to raise the questions and to ask for the clarifications. With their participation, we conducted the program.
Okay. Did you, was the training evaluated at the end?
Pardon?
Was the training evaluated? Did anybody fill out an evaluation form to comment on your training?
Yes.
They evaluated your training?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So you got feedback.
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Volunteer to explain what this means. Or am I going to have to do what trainers don't like to do, which is pick on somebody because no one's going to volunteer? Are there any volunteers? Who wants to explain what they think that means? Okay, I'm actually glad no one's volunteering because I'm going to teach you another training technique. When I first started speaking and was telling some personal anecdotes and threw the phone into the water, I paid attention to who smiled, showed me teeth, who looked me in the eye. I paid attention to this because as a trainer, if a person is relating to me like that, even though we're strangers, if they're relating to me like that, chances are they are not an introvert because they're exposing themselves in a vulnerable moment. They're smiling when I'm giving a joke. So I remember the 3 or 4 of you, and I'm going to pick on one of you right now. Sir, you, when I first started speaking, you were very attentive, you were smiling, you have a nice face. I was immediately attracted to you as a trainer. So therefore, since no one's volunteered, I'm going to pick on you. What do you think this means? If you don't want to answer it, just tell me that. Say, I'm not comfortable answering it. Okay, no worries, no worries. Does anybody else want to take a crack? Okay. What it means is training is important because everything evolves, everything grows, everything develops. At least it should. I guess the moment we stop evolving or growing as people is probably the moment our heart stops beating and we're either buried or cremated, whatever your preference is, as far as dealing with people who no longer are alive. I think training is important because in our professional lives and in our personal lives, we never stop learning. We never stop learning. Therefore, training is everything because it takes a special person to be a good trainer. What do you think is the difference between training and capacity development? The terms training and capacity development are sometimes confused or used interchangeably. Training is usually one element of capacity development. It usually focuses on providing skills for specific problems. Let me tell you something. I've been a consultant, as that slide noted. I've been a consultant for over 20 years in the international development work, and I've worked for a lot of different donors. And they all like to call, they don't like to call training training. You might have noticed this. They don't like to call it, they like to call it capacity development or capacity building. They don't like to call it training, and there's a reason why they're doing that, because their approach, or what the kinds of training or the way that they want to address gaps, let's say in the Sri Lankan government, capacity gaps, and the way the Sri Lankan government wants to address capacity gaps is not simply through training. Training is a response to capacity gaps. Okay? We don't deliver training if people don't need the training. So capacity development encompasses a whole range of activities designed to empower individuals and institutions. And this can include, I mean, you name it. I have some examples up here that might not be so pertinent to what you folks do as procurement officers, but I think you can understand the context. Analysis of policy context, awareness building, institutional adjustments, policy research, policy immersion. In your case, as procurement officers, I'm not sure exactly what each of you do, but I have a general idea. Capacity development encompasses a whole range of activities designed to empower individuals and institutions, including how to prepare better tender documents, perhaps how to get women-owned businesses more involved in government procurement, perhaps teaching stakeholders how to prepare a procurement proposal and a budget. These are the kinds of things that, in the context of what you do in your professional livelihoods, is appropriate or relevant to capacity development. Training is embedded within a broad set of activities carefully designed to take into account the local cultural, policy, and organizational context. This last point, organizational context. Very often when you're delivering training, you're going to want to know who are you training? You know, am I training members of parliament, which I have done in the past? Am I training permanent secretaries, or here what you would call secretaries only? Am I training accountants? Am I training people who have just been hired by the government? They're rookies. They've never worked for, is it their first job out of university, right? As far as organizational context is concerned, you want to know who you are training. And ideally, in most cases, you want to know who you are training before you deliver the training, so that you can tailor the training context and content to those people. For the purposes of all the TOT that I've ever delivered around the world, I think these are the four main training categories: workshop, conference, seminar, coaching, and mentoring. So how many of you attended workshops? How many of you attended workshops? Right. Were they really workshops? Let me further refine my question. Were you asked to work during the workshop? You were asked to work. How were you asked? Thank you. How were you asked to work? What did you have to do at the workshop? Okay, very good. Have any of you been to workshops where the only person who did the work was the trainer? Where you weren't asked to do something like that? I have. And then, of course, there's coaching and mentoring, which is perhaps the most important kind of training. And I bet you, I know you all do it. You have done it, and you will continue to do it. Some of you might not even realize you're doing it. You might not even realize that you're coaching people and mentoring people. That was formal training. But it's the coaching and mentoring. That is probably the most impactful training that we experience. And like I said, a lot of you here might not realize it, but You've been training people your entire careers. You've just been doing it informally. But you've still been a trainer. You've still been a trainer. So coaching and mentoring is very important. And I bet you some of you who like doing it have certain ways or techniques of doing it. And that's the easiest way to do training, isn't it? That's the easiest way to do anything. If we do something that we enjoy or we find attractive, by all means, we're going to keep doing it. Does anybody have any interest in coaching and mentoring? Does anybody here think they've never been coached or mentored? Anyone? Because if you think that, I have a handkerchief for you because I'm going to cry for you because I don't believe it. I think we've all been coached and mentored. And again, I go back to our personal lives. What's another term for coaching and mentoring in our personal lives? Starts with a P. Thank you. Right? The greatest coaching and mentoring responsibilities that any of us can have as individuals is as a parent. Exactly. We coach and mentor our children all the time. Sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes we get frustrated. Sometimes we lose our cool. Yeah? Sometimes we're not happy with the way maybe we coach and mentor our kids. But at the end of the day, we are their greatest teachers. We are their greatest trainers. So one of the other reasons why I really enjoy giving this TOT, and I didn't say this in the beginning because maybe I'd forgotten it. One of the other reasons why I really enjoy giving this TOT is because it's the kinds of things that we learn here or that we discuss today are the kinds of things that we do not only in our professional lives, but in our personal lives. One of the important things about training, and this applies, I think it applies for all the categories, is the anecdotes, making it personal. Telling a story at a certain time during the training that can be impactful and can make people smile or even feel sad, feel empathy for you, and get them thinking about how in their lives, how they perhaps responded to coaching and mentoring situations. This can be done too during technical trainings. I mean, it has to be done during technical trainings, doesn't it? I mean, if you're an accountant, let's say, I like going back to accountants because it's very technical work. It's very specific work. If you're an accounting trainer, if you're training people on accounting, even when you're delivering technical training, you need to tell anecdotes. You need to tell stories. You need to explain to people how the technical information that you're imparting to them will actually be practically used and implemented. Of making yourselves more self-sufficient, more reliable on your own brains, on your own abilities, and less reliant upon some loud and middle-aged and overweight New Yorker. So these are the reasons why, one reason why a TOT is important. It really is. There's also economies of scale. I mean, you've all heard that old saying, you know, if you give a person a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a person to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, right? Well, it's sort of the same with the TOT. If I teach a person to be a trainer, then that person can go out and deliver, I mean, only God knows how many trainings they'll be delivering in the future. But then you can also go out and train other people to be trainers. And there's this geometric progression where if it works out and it's properly coordinated and sustained, you can train a lot of people in Sri Lanka to be trainers, and you won't require external assistance as much as you have in the past. There's one missing bullet point here. I don't want to talk about it yet because, well, no, I do want to talk about it. It's something that we're going to be talking about a lot for the remainder of the training that I'm going to be giving you. What is missing from this? We have objective of trainings, who is sponsoring your trainings, who should participate in the trainings, a gender balance. There's one thing missing here that drives all trainings. Anybody figure it out? I'll give you a hint. It's the form of paper. You use it to buy things. Money, the budget. We're going to talk about it in a few moments. I don't want to depress all of you yet. Money always depresses everybody because usually no one's got enough of it. But anyway, in this case, I want to first talk about these bullet points before we start talking about your training budget, because a training budget can be pretty depressing. And it really is a decisive factor in determining or how to selecting trainees and commencing preparing a training program. But before we get to the depressing money aspects of training or resource availability, let's talk about some things that are a little more pleasant to talk about. Who should participate in your training if you want to achieve your training objective? Remember a little while ago I went around and asked all of you what your job titles are. Are there any directors here? You know, very often you'll have, I've delivered trainings where I've had a mix of people, senior, mid-level, junior. I've delivered trainings just with junior. I've delivered trainings to members of parliament. I've delivered trainings to military officials in the Papua New Guinea Defense Force. You know, I delivered trainings to members of diplomatic corps at the ASEAN Secretariat. You know, diplomats from Thailand and from Cambodia and from Singapore and from Indonesia, countries at different levels of development, some wealthier than others. So who should participate in your training is a very important consideration when you're thinking about what your training objectives are and what the composition of your training class or trainees is going to be. Gender balance is also huge. And it's huge for two reasons. One reason why it's huge is because it's the decent thing to do. You know, it's having a gender balance of a well-represented training class with men and women reflects the decent thing to do. It reflects a proper approach towards equal rights and human rights. And women deserve to be as trained as well and as often and as frequently and as in-depth as men. The other reason why gender balance is important is because it's important to the donors. It's important to USAID. It's important to DFID. It's important to the World Bank. The people who are paying the bills want gender balance in the training. Now, it's not always so easy. You know, it's not always so easy. If you're a health extension agent and you're delivering training on, you know, how to care for the hygiene of a newborn child, in most countries in the world, your entire class is going to be women who've just had babies, for example. So in that case, good luck with the gender balance. But in other cases, as what we're doing today here with procurement officers, gender balance is to be expected, and it is important. And when we talk about gender balance, we also want to talk about gender sensitivity. So I've delivered trainings in places, especially in small countries in the Pacific, like the Solomon Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia and Tuvalu. I've delivered trainings in very small places in the Pacific where I had to end the training by a certain time or have it start after a certain time because many of the women in the audience had to take children to school and then pick them up at school. So when we're talking about gender balance, there's also a sensitivity element to this. So you need to pay attention to that. I don't know, in Sri Lanka, if you're going to be doing trainings out in the districts, this might be an issue you need to take into consideration. What time do you start the training and what time you end it so that parents can pick up their children and drop them off at school? So these are the sorts of things that you need to keep in mind. Again, we're talking about having a certain level of officer or manager available for a specific training. And then, of course, there's course curriculum and materials. I mean, I think some of you are beginning to see that for some of these bullet points, I mean, there are people who get PhDs in this topic. There are HR and training and capacity development experts who spend years getting master's degrees and doctorates on course curriculum and development. We're going to be spending only a few moments talking about this sort of thing. But I think you're beginning to see the picture here. As a trainer, there are a lot of things you need to take into account when you're preparing a training. Some of these things, people devoted their entire careers, 20, 30 years of their lives, to developing course curriculum and materials. We can't We can't afford that sort of luxury, okay? What we're doing is sort of nuts and bolts training, but it can be just as effective. But you need to consider, when you're selecting your trainees and your program, you are then going to need to figure out what kinds of course curriculum and materials you're going to need. Will you come up with textbooks? Will you come up with just slides? Will you come up with case studies? Will you come up with international comparisons? Very important topic. Very important topic. You also need to figure out if you're going to be the only trainer. It can be exhausting to be the only trainer. If you're spending 6 hours a day over the course of 5 days delivering a training, you do a lot of talking, you do a lot of pacing, at least I do. I'm not one of these people. I love podiums, and we're going to talk about, later on, we're going to talk about how a podium can be your friend, especially if you're a nervous public speaker. You might have seen some people in the past giving a speech where you can see them grabbing the podium like as if it's going to break apart in their hands. Your podium can be your best friend, but I don't like to spend too much time behind it. I think some of you might have noticed that. But there are people who like to spend their entire time behind a podium. And there are some people who, when they get nervous, the podium is their lifeboat. They go back to it. So as the only trainer, you need to think about these sorts of things. If you're working in a team, then you need to figure out or delegate responsibilities. Who's going to prepare training materials? Who's going to prepare the slides? Who's going to deliver the slides? You need to break up the responsibilities based on people's strengths and competencies as well as their interests. Some of you here might be really scared of public speaking, or might be very poor public speakers, but you might be very good at coming up with training curriculum. You might be very good at preparing training manuals or guidelines or standard operating procedures. Well, that's where the team effort comes into play. If you don't want to do the training delivery because you're not good at it or you're scared to do it, maybe you have another strength and you can help prepare the slides, or you can help identify the trainees, or you can help prepare the training needs assessment. These are the kinds of things that you can think about. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be great at everything. But those things that you are good at, you can contribute to the team. So if you're the only trainer, like I am this week, I wish you all the best. It's not easy. It can be exhausting. If you're a member of a team, then take advantage of everybody's strengths. And if you're one of those exceptional trainers where public speaking is a weakness, or you're frightened to do it, if you're one of those exceptional trainees who wants to improve his or herself, then by all means, start gradually taking on more public speaking responsibility or training delivery. Improve your performance. You can only do that by practicing. Also think about any outsiders that might attend trainings. By outsiders, I mean, I consider outsiders anybody who's not been invited to the training or anybody who's not delivering the training. So will any outside officials attend the training? And if they do, what will their role be? Will you ask them to come up and give a little presentation? Will you ask them to introduce the training? I think these are the kinds of things that are important to keep in mind. Should the media be involved in your training? Let me tell you something. I've seen people lose their jobs because they didn't handle this very well. They didn't handle media very well when it comes to training. If you're delivering a training and someone comes up with the brilliant idea of having a journalist or a newspaper or one of the evening television news shows to come to do a quick 30-second pan of the room and explain what the training is going on, you better make sure you get approval from the most senior person you can. You better make sure you get approval, because journalists and media and the government, what the government is doing in some countries, even when it comes to trainings, can be very controversial. Furthermore, the people who are paying for the training, in this case USAID, might not like the idea of journalists or the media being involved in the training. So keep these sorts of things in mind. In some cases, it's a brilliant idea. It's a great idea to get your message out, to show the people, in this case of Sri Lanka, that the government is making an effort to improve its capacity so that you can improve the quality of services to the people of Sri Lanka. Isn't that what your jobs are? But you better make sure that the people who need to approve it. So be careful getting journalists and the media involved. And if the subject doesn't come up, then don't raise it. But if it does come up, make sure the most senior people approve it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, who should provide opening comments at your training? Who should provide opening comments at training? Ideally, you want as senior a person as possible. Because when you have a senior person from your organization delivering the opening remarks, it's demonstrating to everybody who's participating in the training that the organization is committed to the training. So it's important to figure out who is going to be involved in your training. There's that word, budget. It finally showed up. So I try to keep it out of the presentation as long as possible. But let's face it, with most of the decisions that we make in our lives, professional and personal, have something to do with money or budget, or we're all PFM, finance experts here, fiscal envelopes, budget ceilings, resource envelopes. You get my drift, you get my picture. Your budget is going to play a huge role in determining what kind of a training venue you can deliver your training at. And if we're delivering a training in a venue where we've never been before, especially in that scenario, you want to try to visit the training facility the day or night before the training commences. Ideally, this is what you should do, or at least someone on your team should do it. For example, I've delivered trainings, technical and TOT, where I like to have round tables. I like round tables. Round tables are good because it's easier to break people up into teams for the workshops, right? It's easier this way than these long rectangular tables. So what happens? You have local consultants on the ground in country X. Let's call it Uganda. That's where I've recently been working also. You have people on the ground in Uganda, and you have a hotel that's been hired outside Kampala, the capital. Let's say it's 50 kilometers outside. And you tell the hotel, we want 6 round tables, 8 chairs at each table. You get to the hotel the night before the training, and they've got the rectangular tables set up. What do? Well, you ask the hotel to fix it, right? You ask the hotel to fix it. And you can ask them that, well, because you're a customer and you're paying them for the service. But you can also ask them that because you were smart enough to arrive there the night before the training. You were wise enough to do that. And you saw that the tables weren't organized the way that you wanted them. We had our break. I asked you folks to come back at a certain time. You all did that. Thank you for that. Phones on silence or leaving the training to use your phones. Adhering to breaks and not wandering off too far. Keeping laptops shut in those instances when people bring laptops to trainings. Expecting full participation, or at least people paying attention to what you're saying. No talking. Respecting opinions. And then asking people to complete course evaluations. Now, very often at the end of trainings, certificates and those sorts of things are given out. I've delivered trainings where people disappear, they run off, and they don't complete course evaluations. So what I've done is I don't give out certificates until I get course evaluations from people. Or I don't give out, in those countries where allowances are given out, I don't hand out money until I know people have given me their course evaluations. Interestingly, I think you guys are going to find this interesting. I have, in all the years that I've been doing trainings, this is the first country where you guys expect an examination at the end of the training. Yeah? This has never happened before in all the countries where I've worked. So on Monday, when I arrived at the hotel there by the Ministry of Finance and the fort, the ladies on my project here informed me, they're like, Mr. Darrell, where's your examination? I was like, what examination? And I was informed that Sri Lankan public servants, when they attend the training, expect to have an examination at the end of it. This is a first for me. In all the countries where I've done training, don't panic, it's only a 10-question examination, and most of the questions are true and false, don't worry. But I had to sit there writing an examination during lunch break yesterday. Some of you look surprised. Have you never heard of this before? You attend trainings, you get an examination, don't you? No. I was told it's a requirement. No? It was a new experience for me. I've never given examinations before anywhere around the world. And the respecting opinions apart is important too. There are no dumb questions. People should be allowed to express their viewpoints and their concerns, and they should be able to ask whatever they want. And the objective behind this training, my goal is not to embarrass anybody. And I told you that story earlier about my university professors who used to throw chalk at people sleeping, or who used to wait for someone to sit down before they continued the lecture. I always thought that was rude and humiliating. And I would never do that to a person. And I suspect as you guys advance on your trainings and develop and deliver trainings in the future, that you'll probably agree with me and not want to embarrass and humiliate people. I strongly suggest not doing that, because the reputation will get out that you do that, and people will stop attending your trainings. How to keep your trainees focused on your training presentation without throwing chalk at them. Here are some ideas or suggestions. Stick to the ground rules that are introduced at the beginning of your training and apply the rules fairly. This is very important. Don't be perceived to show favoritism. Now, obviously, if there's a minister or groups of ministers or parliamentarians in your training, you might need to have a level or element of deference that would be different than for other sorts of public servants or other sorts of people attending a training. But you still want to apply the rules fairly. So even if you have a mix of trainees in a room where you've got very senior people, mid-level people, and junior people, everybody should be treated the same way, with the same amount of respect. And everybody should be asked to adhere the ground rules in the same fashion. No one should be allowed to be disruptive or talk during the training. No one should be using their phones. If they do, they should leave the room, regardless of their job title. Politely ask participants to refrain from talking or using their phones or computers during the training. Don't embarrass trainees. Use the breaks to talk to trainees who are not following training ground rules. Follow them outside. Follow them outside. If they're going to use the toilet, obviously don't follow them into the restroom. But make it a point, if someone is doing something repetitively that you don't like, or that is disruptive, or that's making your job as a trainer difficult, then you have every right to ask them to stop doing it. And that includes asking them during the training to stop. And then if they don't stop, finding time during a break to try to get them alone, because again, we don't want to embarrass people, to get them alone and off to the side where you ask them to stop engaging in that activity. If they don't stop, you might need to talk to a supervisor and have them no longer participate in the training. I know this might seem as a surprise to you, because you folks are excellent participants. You're very respectful, but there are situations when things get out of control and where trainings can be ruined if people are not sent back to their offices. So please keep this sort of thing in mind. Another way to keep your trainees focused is by engaging them and asking questions, formally or informally, trying to remember their names, and always being receptive to questions and comments, maintaining eye contact, coming out from behind the podium and mingling with people, going up to them and asking them a question. In some countries, it's perfectly acceptable to touch somebody on the shoulder and say thank you or ask them a question. In other countries, touching people is a no-no. You need to figure this sort of thing out as you're a trainer. If you ever deliver training outside of Sri Lanka, you'll need to understand what is culturally acceptable during a training and what is not culturally acceptable during a training. Remember the back in Mongolia? No, don't do that. And then, of course, there's props, like the phone in the water. I have 3 questions here, and I'm going to start asking people questions and their responses. Are there any volunteers for the first one, or am I going to have to be the bad trainer and pick on people? Anybody want to volunteer for this first one? The hotel where your training is taking place is under renovation. The machinery and construction noises are very loud. You discover this, you're fortunate because you're smart and you prepared and you went to the training venue the night before the training. You discover this the night before the training begins. When you visit the training venue, what do? Anybody want to volunteer? You look eager to volunteer. You're on the edge of your seat. What would you do if you were the lead? Let's say there were 5 of you getting ready to deliver a week-long training, and you were the team leader. You were the boss of the training team. So this falls on your shoulders to resolve. What would you do?
We have to discuss with the hotel management to stop them. Otherwise, because we can't change the venue, then best thing is to control them by discussing the management.
Okay. What if that's what I would do too? What if you do that? I don't want to make this too onerous. I don't want to be too much of a devil's advocate here. But what would happen? This has happened to me, and I was humiliated when this happened. What would happen then? What would you do then if you went to the hotel management and told them this, and they said to you, "Look, I have a strict deadline. These contractors are very expensive. They need to work. They cannot totally stop working." Do you know what I'm not going to ask you to answer that because I'm not trying to embarrass you. But let me tell you what happened, because that happened to me once. And I had to come up with an agreement with the hotel management where they would be allowed to do the construction during certain times. Like, for example, they would work the lunch period for the training was an hour. I extended it to an hour and a half. During that time, they worked. And then they stopped working after that hour and a half was up. The breaks, we had a 15-minute break today, right? I extended it to 45 minutes so that they could work during those 45 minutes. Now, did the training take longer than planned? No, it didn't, because I sped up a little with the slides. I didn't spend the usual amount of time I would have spent on the slides. So we compromised. I compromised and improvised. But that's what I actually had to do once for an entire week. Can you believe it? It was horrible. It was horrible. Okay. Because what can you do? The training is planned, right? The training is planned. People travel from all over the country to come to the training. You're flying in and out on a tight schedule. You can't redo these things. You have to work with reality. You have to be flexible, and sometimes you have to be creative and think about something in a different way so you can get it done. That was a tough week, believe me. So, for your number 2, you look so excited. Good, now you're smiling, thank you. During your training, you notice a trainee is spending too much time texting or using the phone, even talking on the phone. You stop the training and you ask him to put his phone away. He follows your request, but later on in the day, he resumes using his phone, texting and talking on it. What would you do? So you would follow him out during a break and confront him. Okay. I have friends and relatives who would go up and just punch the person in the face. Obviously, we can't do that. They're not trainers. They're just friends. But anyway, exactly. You don't want to embarrass anybody, but you want everybody to be treated equally, right? And you don't want any disruption. So you would follow them out, and you would ask them to stop behaving that way. What if they ignored you? What if you came back and they continued doing it? What do you think you'd do then? Let's say they're a junior person. They're not a very senior person. They're an accountant, a junior accountant. What would you do? Hint, hint, their boss is also in the training. What would you do then? Talk to the boss, right? Perhaps at another break, you could go up to the boss and say, look, I asked so-and-so to stop using the phone. They're still doing it. Can you please talk to them, right? You could try that tactic. Hopefully, by then, they'll behave. They won't be naughty, right? But these are the kinds of things you're going to have to think about. Otherwise, you're going to lose control of the training venue, the training participants, and you might just want to quit and walk out. So you can't let that happen. You cannot let that happen. You have to remain professional. You have to finish the training, and you have to figure out the best way to get it done. So you need to be creative sometimes. At Harvard University or Cambridge or the University of Sri Lanka, I don't care how good a trainer you are, how good a public speaker you are, there's always ways to improve your training skills. And since many of you are only just now embarking upon being a trainer, this is a very good opportunity for you to develop good habits, right? It's a good time for you because you're doing something now from the beginning. It's a good time for you to develop good habits. And we're going to be talking about that tomorrow, about how to become a more effective public speaker, about practice, about techniques for becoming a good public speaker. We'll be discussing a lot of that tomorrow. But I just want to remind you now, and I'll remind you again tomorrow, you already have a lesson learned, and you're halfway, we're 3/4 of the way done with the first day of training. Your lesson learned is you're new to training, so now is a good opportunity for you to develop those solid habits so that you become a more and more effective trainer as you do it more and more often. That's the only way to get good at it. Okay, decades to developing course curriculum and materials for different topics and different types of students, whether they be kindergartners or high schoolers or PhD candidates. For session 2, these are the main topics that we'll be discussing, and this discussion will run over to tomorrow. We'll talk about training materials or types, how to prepare a training agenda, how to link training to a project, a tour, or a budget cycle, like this training. This training is linked to a project, right? The STAIR project under Leadership and Public Financial Management 2. This training is being delivered because the terms of reference or the contract that my company signed said that we needed to deliver certain types of training. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. We'll talk about how to develop good PowerPoint slides. Does everybody here know what PowerPoint is? Or better yet, does anybody here not know what PowerPoint is? There's no reason to be embarrassed. Do you know what PowerPoint is? It's a program that allows you to prepare these slides, right? So if you have Microsoft Office, if you have Word, and if you have Excel on your computer, you definitely have PowerPoint. It's very easy to use. If someone were to sit down with you and spend 5 minutes explaining how to use it, you would figure it out very quickly. And because it's a Microsoft Office product, you can copy and paste from Word documents into it and vice versa. So PowerPoint slides are very important. They are the current way most people deliver trainings now. So we'll talk about how to develop good PowerPoint slides. We'll talk about how to deliver a training based on the slides. We'll talk about how to deliver a training based on a manual or a workbook or a user's guide. And then we'll discuss if you're not by yourself, if you're not a solo trainer, we'll talk about how to decide as a team which trainers are responsible for which topics. We're also going to be talking about, I'm going to do what my old professor used to do. We're just talking about what topics on the course curriculum materials we'll be discussing for the next 45 minutes or so, and then running into tomorrow morning. We'll also discuss how to develop very technical course curriculum materials. That might interest some of you, because some of you are technicians, technocrats, technical officers, whether they be accountants or procurement officers, and you're going to be delivering technical training in the future. So you might be interested in knowing how to develop very technical course curriculum and materials. We'll talk about training tools and case studies, role-playing, practical sessions, electronic applications, tailoring training materials to your audience, developing and delivering a TOT, and updating your training materials in response to new regulations. This is an important one. This is actually one of the reasons why people can conduct regular training. I've been told that there's a new procurement law right now in front of that here in Sri Lanka, or a new PFM law that has new, is it audit or procurement? Does anybody know? Like the procurement guidelines. So Parliament is going to soon be meeting to determine if they're going to pass it or not, right? Okay. That's a milestone event when it comes to government procurement in Sri Lanka, isn't it? I mean, this new law is going to be the driver of all future procurement for the foreseeable future, right? And there are going to be new articles, new provisions, new requirements for the Constitution. But this procurement law is explaining how to implement that article. Okay. So I reckon that's going to mean a whole new round of training for people, won't it? If there's a new procurement law or guidelines, then people are going to have to learn how to use them. Oh, it hasn't been updated since then. Just let everybody know, before this session began, I told this gentleman that I was going to call on him for questions because he hasn't spoken up, and now he's speaking up, so I can't call on you for questions now, can I? I'm kidding. So there's going to be new guidelines, right? People are going to have to learn these new guidelines, especially people in the line ministries, aren't they? So what's the plan? Are you people going to be playing the big role in training people on the new guidelines? I hear yeses. Most probably. I heard a couple, so is there a snake in the room, or are you saying yeses? Okay. So it looks like there's going to be some interesting training coming up in the near future, and you guys are going to be the caretakers and the disseminators of all this new information, right? There you go. So this training topic seems pretty timely for all of you, especially if you're going to be involved in what sounds like, I'm an outsider, but I've been around the block a couple of times. It sounds like this is going to be a pretty ambitious rollout. How many line ministries are there here? 51. 51. And every one of those line ministries has their own procurement unit. And every provincial government has its own procurement unit. Do they have a different set of procurement laws, or is this the same law that same law? And the districts have procurement units. Hospitals, schools. Well, sounds like thousands and thousands of people to train, doesn't it? And I imagine many of the people in this room are going to be doing that training. Yeah? Or at least what they call in some countries the socialization of a new guideline, right? You'll go out, you'll explain to people what's going on, you'll explain to people new operating procedures. I imagine there's new requirements for signatories on things, tendering, that sort of thing, right? So it looks like this penultimate bullet point here, it looks like this one is really relevant to what's going on in Sri Lanka right now. Updating your training materials in response to new regulations, expectations, or if you haven't delivered any training in a long time. This is really good. I'm glad I'm here. It sounds like it's a meeting of the stars in the sky. You guys are going to be responsible for some serious socialization or dissemination of some important new guidelines. And I'm here to help you figure out how to be a trainer and how to try to do that in some sort of semblance of order so that it's easier for you guys to do this sort of thing in the coming months, perhaps years. And I also want to discuss the Internet's role in developing and delivering training materials. So this is my first time in Sri Lanka. I'm here for 2 weeks. I'm flying out Friday night, in case any of you want to come to the airport and see me off. And, yeah, right, it's the 1 a.m. flight, good luck. Anyway, and one of the things that I noticed, when you go to a country for the first time, you notice all kinds of things, right? You notice, well, what side of the road they drive on. You notice what languages their street signs are in. One of the things that I notice is how connected to the internet a country is. And as I got in the car, the hotel car, because I didn't feel like dealing with a tuk-tuk. It was raining that night. Remember how big the rains were last week? I got in the car, and I'm heading over to this very expensive restaurant, although I didn't know how expensive it was until I got there. And I noticed that on the back seat of the hotel car, it says Wi-Fi in the car. And I travel a lot. I think I mentioned that. I've been working a lot in Africa, and Egypt, and Malawi, Uganda. It's been a couple years since I was in Asia. I spent 4 years in Jakarta, a year in Dhaka, a year in Maldives. But that took me by surprise because, I came back and asked people on the project, the Sri Lankans, so how is internet connectivity outside of Colombo? And they said it's really good. Is that true? The country's pretty wired plugged in, right? Well, then maybe you guys have maybe if you want to save some money, which everybody wants to do, right? As you roll out these guidelines and socialize these important procurement guidelines, maybe instead of traveling for days or weeks on end and missing your families and sleeping in hotels and eating lousy hotel food or whatever it is you do when you're on the road, maybe you can deliver trainings over the internet. Maybe you can do it, via conference call or with Skype or however you do it here. Maybe you don't need to do so much traveling, because if Sri Lanka is as connected as I perceive it to be, and as you folks say it is, then maybe you don't need to do a lot of traveling. Maybe you can save money, since money is always a limiting factor in what kinds of trainings that we can deliver. Maybe you can use the web to do it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So if the training is linked to a tour, there's a very good chance it's going to have specific objectives and a specific agenda that align with the grand objectives or outcome expectations of the tour. So in this case with STARE, it's short-term assistance to the Ministry of Finance in procurement and audit reform. And that's the kind of trainings that Tom and his folks have been delivering for the last year or two. So this training is linked to a tour, and therefore there is a proper sequencing of the training linked to technical objectives. When preparing a training agenda, you also want to know how many people you will train. Will there be 5 people or 500? This is going to determine how long some of your discussion sessions are going to be, what kinds of topics you can realistically cover over a specific amount of time. Obviously, it's also going to determine things like we've already discussed, the size of the training room, the training venue, as well as the training budget, which is, once again, going to have an impact on all aspects of your training agenda. What is the location of the training? How will you prioritize training topics? Meaning, how will they be sequenced? And also, do you want to spend more time on a specific topic compared to other topics, right? That's one way to prioritize. That's one way to prioritize how you're going to deliver your training topics. Is there a topic or two that are more important than other topics? If that's the case, then how much time should you devote to a topic that you think is a higher priority than other topics? Very often, as a trainer, you're not going to get to determine the priority of training topics. It'll already be determined in the terms of reference, or it might already be determined through a combination of what is in the terms of reference, what the government wants you to train, and what the person or people who are paying for the training, the development partner, wants you to discuss and train people on. So very often, you're not going to, as a trainer, you might not get to prioritize the training topics. You might be told what the priority is, in which case, that's fine. Actually, as a trainer, you might prefer that. It might make it easier to determine what the priorities are. Very often, if I just flew into this country, I'm here for 2 weeks, who am I really to decide what the training priorities are for this project or for the government of Sri Lanka? I don't want that responsibility, to be honest with you. So very often, how you will prioritize training topics, if it's taken out of your hands and if it's decided by people much more important than you, you should feel relieved as a trainer, because that means you can just focus on what needs to be discussed and delivered as far as the training is concerned. You will also want to know how long will the training last, again, influenced by the budget. Is it going to be a half a day session? Is it going to be a 2.5 day session? Or are you going to be delivering, let's say, a month or 2 months of training over a 12-month period? You need to know when preparing your agenda how long the training will last, because that will impact things like the numbers of people that you can train, as well as how the training topics have been prioritized. And then finally, when preparing a training agenda, you would like to know, or it will be good to know, if there will be any follow-on training. The steps to preparing training are always important. You know, once you've figured out, I think once you've figured out these sorts of things, the next step is to actually start preparing the training. There are some generally accepted rules about preparing PowerPoint slides, and one of them, obviously, they need to be properly sequenced, right? You don't want to be jumping all over the place. That just is going to confuse your trainees, and it's probably going to confuse you too. So obviously, you want them properly sequenced. This is like a no-duh. This is obvious, right? This one might be less obvious. I mean, I've seen PowerPoint slides that looked like a novel, like someone was writing a novel. You know, the font was size 10. It looked like a Word document. You couldn't see anything. If you're in the back of a room, you'd be like, what did that person put on the slide? You can't read it. It's too busy. And when that happens, you lose your trainees. You lose your credibility. People don't want to listen to you. They don't want to listen to what you have to say because you didn't take the time to respect the fact that their eyes, your eyes, can only read certain size font from the back of a room, right? So one of the things you need to keep in mind is, as a general rule, you want to limit the number of bullet points you have in a slide. If you go back and look at my slides, you'll see I limit it to 6. And I also try to limit the number of lines that I write for the bullet points to 2, no more than 3 even. Once you start doing that, once you start making the slides too busy, people check out. You've lost them. So in addition to making sure that your slides are properly sequenced, you want to make sure they're not too busy, which means you also want to pay attention to font size. So if you're working as an individual trainer, you can decide these things on your own, right? If you're working in a team, then you should make sure that everybody understands that your titles to your slide, what's up here, is going to be a certain font and a certain script, right? Whether it's Times New Roman or Calibri or whatever. So you all want to agree that for the title of a slide, you use font size 22, Calibri or Garamond or whatever it is that you want to use. And then you also agree that in the main body of the slide, you agree again on the maximum font size and what script to use, what italic, whatever it's called. And this way, all the slides will look alike and it'll be formatted properly. Because once again, the way the slides look is important. The content is obviously the most important thing, but if the slide, if they're not consistent, if your font sizes are different, if you have some things bolded and some things not bolded and some things italicized and some things not italicized, then your slides are going to look lousy and people are going to check out. Is to follow the advice under that first point, which is when you begin delivering training topics, try to focus on topics that you know well or that you like to talk about. It's the easiest thing to discuss. If you have an interest in something or if you know something really well, then it makes sense for you to take the lead in presenting that training topic if you're a part of a training team. It can get complicated, though, if someone else on the team feels the same way about that particular training topic, at which point you should probably defer to the team leader or the supervisor or boss as far as who gets to discuss which topics. As you develop your training skills and technical skills, diversify your training experience and deliver trainings on topics that are new to you. This is a really effective way to become a better trainer. if we're constantly delivering trainings on something that we know really well, we fall into a comfort zone. Yeah? I think this can happen with a lot of aspects of our lives. We fall into a comfort zone, we take things for granted, and maybe our training skills don't evolve, our public speaking skills don't evolve. So you might want to, as your training experience evolves, and as you become a more experienced trainer, start to take on topics that maybe you don't know very well, because I guarantee you, you're going to get to know them very well once you start training people on those topics. So let's begin day 2. Now we've gone. I hope that wasn't. I hope that going through those slides didn't make you dizzy, but I did want to do that for the sake of the few people who weren't here yesterday, and also just to give you guys a little refresher. Training needs assessments. My goodness, talk about a niche or specialized part of training. There are people, I've come across them in my industry, in the development world, who only do this. They only go out and do TNAs. They only go out and assess what sorts of capacity gaps organizations have in order to then come up with training programs to address those gaps based on what the mandate of an organization is. So in very simple terms, a training needs assessment is a scientific way to measure the experience and capacity of training candidates. What does it look like? Well, it's usually on a piece of paper. It's usually, ideally, it's no more than 3 or 4 pages, because anything longer than that, people aren't going to want to complete it. And it's basically a survey or a questionnaire. But the people who are really good at preparing TNAs prepare questions in the survey or questionnaire that can be measured. They don't ask yes or no questions, basically, is what I'm getting at. Yes and no questions are not the kinds, yes and no questions are not as subjective as training needs assessments experts would like. They ask questions that can then be used, that could then be quantified and used in some sort of statistical analysis to figure out what capacity gaps exist, how those gaps are impacting, usually negatively, an organization's mandate, and then what sorts of responses or trainings need to be developed in order to address those capacity gaps. Now, you all work for the Ministry of Finance, correct? And the Ministry of Finance has a human resources department, doesn't it? An HR department? Have any of you ever had any sort of communication or interaction with the Ministry of Finance's HR department? They're responsible for making sure you guys get paid on time, right? Is that one responsibility of theirs? Okay. So how do all of you, for all of the years that you've been working at the Ministry of Finance, have you all been paid on time? Have you ever had to walk down some hallway to go find the HR people to say, hey, you guys didn't pay me this period, you all get paid on time? Well, that's good. That's an important function of an HR department. You want to know another important function of an HR department? It should be doing this sort of thing. It should be conducting training needs assessments. Your HR department should also be keeping track of the trainings that you guys participate in. So if you're ever interested in conducting training needs assessments as a part of your training agenda or strategy, I suggest at some point you go talk to your HR department. See if they do this sort of thing. Because if they do, then there's a good chance there'll be a handful of professionals there who can help you prepare and conduct a training needs assessment. You won't have to do it by yourself. The same thing with coming up, let's say, with training slides or training materials, or even when it comes to contacting officials in other ministries or at the provincial or district governments when you want to start rolling out, let's say, some socialization training about the new procurement guidelines. Check out and see if your HR department can help you. You might be surprised. You might be surprised both ways. You might discover that in many ways they can help you. You might discover that they're not interested in helping you. But you need to take that first step. you need to reach out to them because you might discover that there's some really good people there who will want to help you. You want to ask them questions about current competencies. So you ask after you're done asking people their job titles, you want to start asking them questions like, how many years have they been in their current position, where they worked before their current position, how many years they were in those positions. You want to ask them about their education background. You want to ask them about any sorts of certifications or licenses that they may own, that they may have earned. You want to ask them questions about how well or not so well they think they're performing their current duties. As far as current competencies are concerned, you will also want to ask them a question about what sorts of tools or resources they need in order to improve their job performance, whether that be training or a computer. In some countries, I've had people tell me they need a desk. They don't have desks. They share desks with people. So current competencies can include a wide range of issues or topics like the ones that I've just told you. You're also going to want to verify a lot of this information by going and talking to their supervisors or their colleagues and asking them about how well or not so well people are performing their duties. Another good way to take a look at current competencies is, if possible, to take a look at or examine recent performance evaluations that people have been given. But don't forget, you're not there to judge whether or not the person is doing their job well or not well. You're there to try to figure out what their competency gaps are so that you can help them improve their performance, which will have a ripple effect through the ministry. Because if you start improving enough people's performances, the performance of the organization or ministry will also then begin to improve. You then also want to look at the business needs of the organization. You want to find out, and for this one, you're going to want to talk to some senior people. You want to find out what is the mission and vision of the organization, what is its mandate, either what's legislated or regulated, what the laws say the ministry is supposed to be doing, or what the ministry thinks it should be doing. You then want to take a look at what kinds of trainings people have received in the past, how long were those trainings, what were the topics, who delivered it, was it done by a donor, was it done by the government, were internationals involved, were academics involved, how long it lasted, was there any sort of evaluation at the end. So you want to take a look at those sorts of things. In the training needs assessment, obviously, you're going to have to take into consideration resources and training costs. There it is again, budget, budget, budget. What can you realistically achieve with the time that you have and with the money that you have? And then the effectiveness of previous trainings. You want to find out if the previous trainings actually achieved any outputs and any outcomes. And here, for this issue, 5, it might make sense to go and talk to the HR unit in the other ministries. So there's an HR unit in finance. Every ministry has one, right? It's a part of its internal or corporate services. So at some point, you might also want to go talk to those people to see if they keep track of trainings and performance evaluations in order to conduct your TNA. TNAs specifically set out to achieve the following: identify competency gaps, identify appropriate types of training, who should be trained, perhaps more importantly, who should not be trained, right? And how training should be tailored to technical and management requirements. Like this one's, I mention this one sometimes and I get smiles. Sometimes answering this question is more difficult than this one. Because you might discover in some organizations that the people who do all the work might be very junior people, and that the senior or mid-level managers aren't really doing a lot of the hands-on day-to-day activities in the organization. They might just be overseeing things. Crab restaurant, the Ministry of Crab the other night, I took a hotel car and I noticed that there was Wi-Fi in the hotel car. Amazing. And then you guys have all confirmed what your colleagues in the previous training confirmed, which is that Sri Lanka is a pretty internet-connected country. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind when it comes to delivering your training, but also when it comes to preparing your training. If you have good internet, that means you can do a lot of really good searches online. You can research topics and identify best international practice. People like that sort of thing. People like to be compared. People like to see how other countries are doing certain things, how well or not so well other countries are doing things. If you have good internet reliability, you can deliver training to people in remote locations, distance learning or e-learning. Yesterday I had mentioned to you how this distance learning and e-learning, at least in the United States, is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, billions and billions of dollars, with people who don't physically go to a university campus anymore. They just sit in their homes and get their master's degrees in business administration by taking distance learning courses, by not getting dressed and going into a lecture in a university. A lot of universities are doing this. A lot of reputable universities. So this is very popular right now, and I think it's only a matter of time before this sort of thing becomes popular in Sri Lanka, especially since you folks seem to like to use technology, and your technology as far as the internet connectability goes seems pretty good, especially compared to my experiences in Africa. This is an interesting slide. I think this is a timely slide for our discussion because you've all revealed to me yesterday the new procurement guidelines that are coming out, right? This slide is talking about updating your training materials in response to new regulations, or in this case, new guidelines. So if any of you had been delivering procurement training in the past, or those two institutes you're talking about, right? They're going to have to revise their training materials now, aren't they? Because the new procurement guidelines are out. They are not going to want to deliver trainings based on old guidelines because the new stuff is out. So training is often driven by training to regulations, guidelines, and instructions. Well, 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 look at that. If something is revised, you will have to, if a law is revised, then the guidelines that are used to implement that law are also going to have to be revised, which is what's happening here in Sri Lanka. New business processes are going to show up. New requirements are going to show up with the new revised regulation or rule or guideline. This is going to have to be reflected in future training materials, and it's going to be. As capacity increases amongst the people you train, you will also need to update your training material. So if you start off delivering trainings to people on very basic, simple topics, right, over the course of many weeks and months, if you continue to deliver training on those topics, but people start learning about the basics, then you will have to start increasing the, I don't know what you want to call about the complexity of the training course and the materials. You'll have to start increasing or expanding the scope of your training. You'll need to update your training material as people become more wiser and more knowledgeable because of your training. Very often, training has to be revised if a new minister or champion of reform is identified. They might have different expectations from the previous ministry leaders. They might want you to start focusing on different training topics. They might want you to start focusing on training topics that align with their strategic vision of the ministry, right? If a new minister of finance comes along, he or she might have a different strategic vision for the Ministry of Finance than the previous minister. And that might influence the training topics and content that you deliver. So keep that in mind. If you have not delivered any trainings in many months, make sure your slides are updated. I don't know about Sri Lanka, but in America, we have a lot of jokes about public speaking, about people being afraid to go up and give a speech or a presentation. I mean, I even have friends who get really embarrassed when you sing them happy birthday. So You have all kinds of personalities in the world. Some people are generally extroverted, like to talk. I throw myself into that category, and some don't. However, just because you like to talk, it doesn't mean you're a good public speaker, okay? There are skills and techniques that you need to master in order to be an effective public speaker and trainer for that matter. Big Fish is an interesting website. I don't know if any of you know it. They have a lot of funny quotes on it. Public speaking is the number one fear in America. Death is number 2. Yeah? From sweaty palms to cracking voices, speaking publicly can be terrifying, yet it is a crucial skill to have. Gestures, facial expressions, interaction, clear speaking, speaking pace, and pauses. I'm at the point right now with my career and public speaking and training where I do these things sometimes and don't even think about doing them. It just happens naturally. Sometimes I walk from behind the podium and I'm just talking and gesturing, and then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I'm not behind the podium anymore. I don't even realize I'm not behind the podium, and I might go back. For those of you who have a fear of public speaking, the podium can be your life raft. It can be what saves you. Because if you have a fear, it can affect you physically. Let's face it. You might tremble. You might not be able to stand up straight. And the podium is a way for you to grab onto something in order to maintain your balance, and even in order to perhaps catch your breath and maybe even get your heartbeat down a little bit. So always remember the podium as your lifeboat. If you're one of these people who likes to roam around like I do, then you have to sometimes remember to go back to the podium, because it's from the podium, and I do that. A lot of people like to use this thing, yeah? The forward and advanced slides. I don't carry it deliberately. I deliberately don't use this because if I carry that, then I don't need to go to my computer to change the slides, right? Don't forget, we don't want to embarrass people. So even if someone maintains eye contact with you and you think they're laughing at your jokes and that there's good interaction, if you call upon them to answer a question and they don't do it within a few or 5 seconds, then move on to somebody else. Gestures are always important, but be careful, because in some societies, some gestures are considered rude, right? I won't get into the gestures that involve fingers and so forth, but I think you know what I'm talking about. In some countries, even this gesture is no good. In some countries, this gesture is no good. I mentioned the other day, or yesterday, I think I might have mentioned how in Mongolia, or maybe it was the other training group, in Mongolia, I did a lot of trainings for 3 years, and if you turn your back to the audience in Mongolia and read slides, it's considered disrespectful to show your back. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that in Mongolia. Also, in Mongolia, don't show the bottom of your feet. Big no-no. So these are the kinds of things that you need to keep in mind as far as gestures are concerned. This and this means 2 different things in the United Kingdom. I won't get into what they are. Those of you who are smiling obviously know the difference. So keep that in mind when you're using gestures. You don't want to do things that are disrespectful. Try to avoid it. Unfortunately, sometimes as a foreigner in a country, you learn these things the hard way. Since most of you will be doing trainings for the remainder of your career and public speaking for the remainder of your careers in Sri Lanka, this won't be as big an issue. You know what is acceptable here amongst your own people. But if you start traveling overseas and giving presentations or discussions or even having interviews with people, remember gestures and ask beforehand maybe what's acceptable and not acceptable. In some societies, pointing is a big no-no. You don't point at people in some countries. In some countries, If I went up to somebody, especially a female trainee, and asked, so what do you think about this slide? I put my hand on them. Oh, big problem. So these are the kinds of things you need to know. As a trainer, again, like I said, if you're ever doing this sort of thing outside Sri Lanka, I think you've all got your own culture covered here in Sri Lanka, and we don't have to worry about these things. Confidence is something that is much more difficult to, I wouldn't even say learn, to understand, to adopt and incorporate as an individual. And it will come with, as far as public speaking goes, with practice, and as far as knowing your material, with, well, knowing your material, being a professional in a certain sector on a certain topic, and being able to deliver training or a public speaking engagement in something that you are passionate about and know something about, combined with your presentation skills and confidence in the way you deliver. The most difficult of the 8 to figure out. Maintaining eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds, complete your comments, and move to another audience member and maintain eye contact with them. You know, you want to make sure that you're maintaining eye contact, but you don't want to creep people out. You don't want to stare at them. You know, I don't want to sit here and talk about eye contact, this entire topic, and just stare at you the whole time. It's kind of creepy, isn't it? But anyway, you want to make sure, sorry, you want to make sure that you do eye contact, you know, and you're looking at eye contact for a lot of reasons. Again, you're looking to see if, well, people are falling asleep, right? You want to see if people are paying attention. You want to see if a person is connecting with you, even if they're not really connecting with you. But if you think they are as the trainer, then you can call on them for questions or comments or anecdotes. If we usually, I mean, I don't know, I reckon in all societies around the world, not maintaining eye contact means maybe you're trying to hide something, even in Sri Lanka, right? If someone is talking to you but not looking at you, or if someone is blinking a lot, I reckon in just about all human societies on this planet, that's a sign that maybe what a person is telling you is not true. Maybe they're trying to hide something. Maybe they're lying. So that's another reason why eye contact is important. Not a difficult thing to learn. Not a difficult thing to learn. You can practice it with your family. You can practice it with your colleagues. You could even practice it with strangers if you wanted to. So learning how to maintain eye contact, how not to spend too much time on somebody because they might think you're stalking them, that's important too. You don't want to creep people out, as we say in America. Gestures, I think I talked a little bit about this. You know, knowing what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Can I point at somebody? Can I go like this at somebody? Can I touch somebody on the shoulder? You know, is this considered rude? Is this considered rude? I mean, all these different gestures, they're important. They can help you get your point across. And again, something that's relatively easy to learn. Something that you can figure out relatively easily. You can practice this in just about any form of communication that you engage in. I know with my son, very often I gesture like this. I never follow through, but I'm like, come over here, get over here. He's 7. He can be a terror at times. So gestures can sometimes get us into trouble, but they can also be a good way to let people know what we're really thinking. Facial expressions are another good way to keep your audience focused and motivated. You know, eyebrows, we're going to talk about that in a moment. The role of eyebrows in public speaking. You might think that sounds silly, but eyebrows can be important. Don't you think? Don't you think eyebrows can be anyway. If you're delivering training to a large audience where people can't see your face, then I think these become more important, don't they? Right? I delivered trainings to 600 people in a large hotel conference room like this one, just 10 times the size. And no one could see my face except the people in the front row. So I relied a lot on gestures. But in an intimate setting like this, a facial expression can let me know what you folks are thinking, but can also let you know what I think is important. When you call upon a trainee to respond to a question or pose a question, think about stepping forward toward the trainee. If you are nervous, plant your feet and use your podium to steady yourself. Remember that? The lifeboat. And then once you gain your confidence, you move away from the podium and continue to your presentation. In some societies, walking up, like let's say I want to ask you a question. If I come up to you like this and I'm asking you a question, I mean, I've been in countries where people run out of the room. You're scaring them, you're intimidating them. Again, you have to be careful. You don't want to overdo it. But sometimes walking up to a person and asking them a question, maintaining eye contact, is a really good way to interact with somebody. And it also demonstrates that I want to know what you're going to say when I ask you something. So interaction is important, gesturing is important, but again, don't overdo it. Don't go running up to somebody, hey, what do you think about... Remember, this is not an informal setting. Clear speaking is important. Can I ask you a question? How many times, as I get older, I'm going to be 50 in 12 days, right? My birthday ending in 0, big deal. By the looks of some of you, you've already hit that milestone. Anyway, I'm going to be 50 in a few days. And I'm finding that I'm becoming less tolerant about a lot of things as I get older. And one thing that makes me really angry is listening to CNN or BBC or some sort of interview where there's this world-renowned expert, this woman or man, they know everything about a certain topic, and they can't speak. Every other word out of their mouth is, I turn the channel. Sometimes I want to throw the remote control at the television. I can't do it. I can't listen to people like that. When I was younger, maybe I was more tolerant. Does that sort of thing bother you? Have you ever stopped listening to somebody, whether it be live, someone on the radio, or someone on television, because every third word out of their mouth is, well, you know, Fundamental 6, clear speaking, it's kind of important, and I think you guys should take it seriously because, well, sometimes, I mean, it's really annoying. It makes the person look like they're not sure about what they're saying, and it makes them look like they're not sure about what they're going to say. Your speaking pace is important. If you want to emphasize a point, consider slowing down. You see what I just did there? If you want to convey excitement to your audience, consider picking up the pace. Hey, we're going to have lunch soon. All right. But after lunch, we're going to have to get back to work. We laugh now because I'm obviously acting to the slide to demonstrate what I'm showing you. But this happens all the time. We probably do it so often that we might not even realize we're doing this sort of thing, especially when we're talking to, I know when I'm talking to my son, I do this a lot also. Speaking pace is important, and it can emphasize the importance of something, or it can emphasize to get ready and get exciting about something. And then, of course, there's the pauses. There's Mark Twain again, that famous American author. The right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. I just did it right there. Pauses are important. They can let people know that what you're about to say next is important. They need to pay attention to it. Does that make sense? I just did it again. These are the ways that we can use pauses to show that something important is coming up. A pause is also a way to let people know that what you just said perhaps was important and that the concept or idea needs to spend a few seconds sinking into your brain. And then, of course, there's eyebrows. Eyebrows speak louder than words. Don't you think so? Yes? No? Maybe so? Eyebrows can let a person know what you're thinking, and they can reveal thoughts that you don't want people to know. So let's not forget the ever-famous eyebrows. Actually, there's one deliberate mistake, and there's one mistake that was made that was not deliberate. And I just discovered it while giving this presentation. But And I'll show you both. I'll show you the deliberate one I made and then the accidental one that I made, and see if any of you noticed. You probably didn't. And as the trainer and speaker, when you're using slides, there's a very good chance that if you make a mistake, no one is going to notice but you. If you do notice that you've made a mistake in a slide or during your training, don't panic and don't try to correct it unless someone notices it. Then you can discuss it. If you make a mistake, try to move on. No one will probably notice but you. Keep on track and deliver your thought training. All public speakers make a mistake. So regroup and continue with your presentation. That's sort of a philosophy on life, right? We all make mistakes in life, so regroup and continue with your life. There you go. So the accidental mistake is this one. I have day 1, day 2, and day 2 again. That should be day 3. Did you notice that? Oh, yikes. Okay, that was accidental. I noticed it during the presentation, and I obviously didn't make a big deal about it. The deliberate mistake, what is PBB? It's not relevant to this training. It was relevant to my training I delivered in Uganda 2 months ago, program-based budgeting. So when I came to this slide, I used subterfuge. I tried to trick you guys. What I did was I skipped to this bullet point. I didn't bother reading those ones because that was the mistake. If I bothered reading to those slides, someone would ask, hey, Mr. Darrell, what the heck is PBB? And I would have been exposed. My mistake would have been exposed. So what did I do? I jumped to this bullet point and just talked about those two. I didn't bother talking about those two. So mistakes are not the end of the world. They happen. As long as it's not a huge one, I don't think credibility is destroyed too much. But don't let them faze you. And obviously, you need to fix those mistakes for the next presentation. If the next presentation, for example, is tomorrow. I want to talk about these public speaking tools. Do any of you engage in visualization? And I'm not talking about meditation. I'm not talking about meditating in a religious sense and visualizing, although that could be a form of visualization for some people who take meditation seriously and do it well. Visualization is an important part. I'm talking about visualizing yourself in a situation before the situation occurs so that you can not be so stressed about the situation. I'll give you an example. So I've done these sorts of trainings in hundreds of training rooms and hundreds of hotels over the years. And what I used to do, I don't do it anymore because I'm a pretty confident trainer now. I mean, like I said, I delivered a training once in a hut, in a bamboo hut in Tuvalu. I mean, I feel like I can do a presentation just about anywhere. But when I was younger and less experienced, I used to visualize the training room where I was going to do the training before I delivered the training. And I would go over the main components of my slides. So for example, our main topics here have been training fundamentals, course curriculum, fundamentals of public speaking. 3 main topics we've been talking about since yesterday. We've been discussing. I would visualize myself, and I would just take 5 minutes to do this, but I would do it several times in a day. I would visualize myself in a room with the tables laid out in a way that I would want them laid out, in front of a podium, discussing those 3 topics, not getting into the weeds and discussing each individual slide, but I would visualize myself in front of a group of people like yourselves in a room with walls, with tables, discussing those 3 broad topics. That is how I would practice my training presentation. I would visualize it. And lo and behold, the next day or the day after when I actually showed up to the training venue, it was, well, I mean, it's got tables and walls and people in it. So my visualization wasn't that far off from the reality of the training room. So I strongly suggest trying to practice this sort of thing in your mind if you're going to be doing a lot of training. Think about what the training room is going to look like, fill it up with people, and then prepare your broad topics, and that's it. That's one way that I, in the very beginning of my career, got over the fear of public speaking. Then, of course, visualization is a good tool before you go on stage or before you go behind the podium. Then there are tools that you can use while you're up here, like adding personal anecdotes. I told you stories about Mongolia, my back to the state, my back to people. I've told you some other stories since I've been up here. Personal anecdotes are great because people listen to them. They listen to them. I know when I hear someone give an anecdote, I think to myself, how would I respond to that situation? Or did I go through a similar sort of experience in my life? That's why anecdotes are so great. To let everybody know that we're human beings, then we all have similar experiences. So personal anecdotes are great public speaking tools. Obviously, there's speaking to serve, keep your eye on the goal. You are training people to increase their capacity, not to increase your capacity. I'm not up here to really learn anything except to try to become a better public speaker, as I always try to do through every experience. And although I did learn some interesting things about training institutes in Sri Lanka, I didn't come into this experience expecting to learn those sorts of things. I came into this experience, I took 3 airplanes and spent 30 hours coming here because I wanted to teach you folks about how to prepare a training, how to be a trainer. So speaking to serve, keeping your eye on the prize, and serving the better good of whether it's your country or mankind in general, trying to make people improve themselves and make themselves better. Practice, 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 which I guess falls into the category of visualization, the kind of thing that you're going to do before the training. Practice your presentations in front of colleagues, in front of a family, in front of a mirror, in front of a dog, in front of a cat. I mean, in front of any living sentient being that has the opportunity to look at you in the eyes also while you're speaking to it. Practice, practice, practice. And then, of course, make them want more. I mean, this is something that this sounds like something Ringling, a circus, the circus would want you to do, or some kind of carnival or casino. But give them enough of your time to make them want to listen to you. Don't make people want to leave too soon. And don't leave the stage because you spoke too long. So most of you came back. You attended the training yesterday. You came back today. I'm hoping that some part or some percentage of the reason why you came back is because you thought that I was an effective speaker yesterday and that I had more to offer you today. I also realize that some of you probably came today because if you hadn't come today, you would have gotten into trouble. But that's okay too. I think it's a combination of a lot of factors for why you came back today. And I think one of them is because you wanted to hear more. So I am pleased and grateful for that. Okay, so the practical session, this is where this becomes a workshop. Hooray, you guys are going to do some work now. There are 1, 2, 3, 5 groups. Awesome. I suggest at least one member of your group be the team leader, making sure that your presentation, so I'd like you to come up with a presentation on this butcher paper with bullet points that respond to the topic that you're going to be assigned. So you can use this to take notes, but then for tomorrow's presentation, you're going to have a clean one for your presentation, as if you had a slide on a PowerPoint slide, okay? Does that make sense? You'll have up to 20 minutes. And as far as presentation goes, so with the 3 groups on Tuesday, one group had just one person present, one group had one person introduce, and then a second person present, and the third group had everybody in the group at one point present. So someone introduced, someone discussed one topic, someone discussed a third topic, a second topic, someone discussed the third topic, and then someone gave the conclusion. It's up to you. If you want to be democratic about this and have everybody present, awesome. If you just want to have one person present, I'm not too impressed, but that's your group's decision. Try to get as many people involved in the presentation, because the idea behind this is to practice public speaking, right? Practice public speaking. So I think it probably makes sense to try to get everybody to present, all right? If you don't want to do that, if someone is truly terrified of presenting or is an introvert, then they don't need to present, but you need to make that decision, okay? And then I might ask you some questions either during or after your presentation, and then I'll give you a quick evaluation, and other people too can chime in if they want to make comments about how well or not so well the presentation went. So here are the topics. I discovered on Tuesday that this should be 2011 and not 2015. Is that true? Who here, are you all cricket fans? I'm sure the men are all cricket fans, but is that accurate? Did you guys win against Pakistan in 2015 World Cup? I did the research online. I want to make sure it's accurate, yeah? Okay. So this is what we're going to do. Can you count off 1 through 3? So you're 1, right? You're going to do topic 2. You're going to do 3. You're going to do 1. You're going to do 2. Okay? And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to prepare a presentation about the topic that you're responsible for. Now, I do this all over the world. I tend to pick on whatever the national passion is for the sport. Okay? I know you guys love your cricket, and I apologize if there's anybody in the room who is not a cricket fan. I suggest if you're not a cricket fan, that still doesn't mean you can't present. It probably means you can't prepare the presentation, but you definitely can present. Let someone else provide the facts, and then you can present, okay? Is everybody okay with this? I see some smiles, some smirks. I apologize, ladies. I understand if you have boyfriends and husbands and that they spend hours in front of the television watching this crazy sport, that this might be bringing up a very sensitive issue for you. But please try, as a group, to respond to these topics.
I attached to the Ministry of Health, working as Additional Secretary Procurement. Today, I'm going to share with you some points regarding this question. Why Sri Lanka's national cricket team won the World Cup in 1996. This World Cup 1996 was called Will's World Cup. That means the sponsors, ICT Wills sponsored the cricket tournament. So this match was called Will's World Cup 1996.
You in the presentation you talked about the Sri Lankan team's dedication to country and cause, And then the next slide was a quote from John F. Kennedy, perhaps one of the most famous quotes of the 20th century about patriotism, right? That was brilliant. Really good use there of that quote. And I think most people around the world know that quote. They might not know who John F. Kennedy is, or they might not know that John F. Kennedy said that, right? He said it at his inauguration, the day he became president. He said that. So people might not know those details, but they know that quote. Really good idea to use it. You listed your winning points, and then followed up with good graphics, and dedicating one slide to each of those winning points. I think you also did not only read the slides, so you went back and forth, I noticed, which is what I do too. Sometimes you jump right into the slide and you start reading it, and then you tell a story or you add some meat to the bones after, or you added some meat to the bones before you read the slide, but you always ended up reading the slide, which is good. You don't want to ignore the slide, right? But you also just don't want to read the slide and go to the next slide. Read the slide and go to the next slide. You want to put some, as I like to say, flesh on the bones, right? Talk a little bit maybe to introduce the slide, then read it, then go on to the next one. So you did that. I think it was a very good presentation. You're obviously an experienced public speaker.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rohan De Silva. I am Senior Assistant Secretary to the Ministry of Health, Nutrition and Indigenous Medicine. I am Sri Lanka Administrative Service Class 1 Officer. I am here to present our topic, which assigned us to our course coordinator or the trainer, is to how to win the 2019 World Cup, which will be held on in England 2019. Mostly divided my presentation into 5 parts. How we are going to win the next World Cup. It consists of 5W and 1H method. The second one, PDCA cycle method. The third one, Kaizen. This is the third strategy. The fourth one come 3M. Another one, PM. Carefully, this is not the Prime Minister. I will explain. This is PM. The last one, the sum proposals, what we should do.
I am J.P. Niroshane, Assistant Secretary to the Ministry of Plantation Industries.
Okay.
When we consider about Sri Lanka cricket, we know the most popular game in Sri Lanka is cricket. In 1996, we won the World Cup, and in 2014, we won the T20 championship. Even though our national game is volleyball, the most popular game in Sri Lanka is cricket. Let's see what happened in the 2011 match. The match was held in R. Premadasa Stadium in Sri Lanka. The Pakistan team won the toss and they elected to bat first. They scored 277 runs, and as a reply, Sri Lanka scored only 266 runs. Then Pakistan team won by 11 runs.
Your slides were clean until you got, well, slide 4 for you. Slide 4 was interesting because it was a little busy, and I think it was subject matter that you don't know very well, and you read that slide, which is okay. That's fine. That's not a big deal. But just an observation. Your transition to introducing your colleague was excellent. That's the way to do it. So when you're, as a trainer or a public speaker, if you're a part of a team, like you guys are, you want to make sure that you properly introduce the person who's taking over the podium, in a seamless way. It was very good. Your transition was very good. And overall, I think it was a really good proposal. You came in, for presentation, you came in at about 17 minutes, which is more than 15 and less than 20, which is the window that we're all falling into. So the length was excellent too. Very good job. Congratulations.